Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, chapter 54, text 18, and also 19 through 20. So we'll chant text 18 together. Rukmitu Rakshaso Vaham Krishnadvid Asahan Avashu Prishtato Nagamat Krishnam Akshauhinya Vrito Bali Rukmitu Rakshaso Dvaham Krishnadvid Ashahan Svashu Prishtato Bhagamat Krishnam Akshauhinya Vrito Bali Rukmitu Rakshaso Dvaham Krishnadvid Ashahan Svashu Prishtato Bhagamat Krishnam Akshauhinya Vrito Bali. Please chant. Rukmitu Rakshaso Dvaham Krishnadvid Asahan Svashu Prishtato Bhagamat Krishnam Akshauhinya Vrito Bali. Rukmitu Rakshaso Dvaham Krishnadvid Asahan Svashu Prishtato Bhagamat Krishnam Akshauhinya Vrito Bali. Okay, the word for word, Rukmi. Rukmi. To, however, Rakshasa, in the style of demons. Udvaham, the marriage. Krishnadvid, the hater of Krishna. Asahan, unable to bear. Svashu, of his sister. Pristha, from behind. Anvagamat, he followed. Krishnam, Lord Krishna. Akshauhinya, by an entire Akshauhini division. Vrita, surrounded. Bali, powerful. So text 19, I should read the translation for text 18. Powerful Rukmi, however, was especially envious of Krishna. He could not bear the fact that Krishna had carried off his sister to marry her in the Rakshasa style. Thus, he pursued the Lord with an entire military division. in text 19 through 20. Rukmi amashi sasam rabdaha shrinvatam sarva bhujam pratijagne mahabahur damshitaha sasarashanaham ahatya samare krishnam apratyuhya charukmimin kuninam na pravekshami satyam etat pravim va. And the translation for text 19 through 20. Frustrated and enraged, mighty-armed Rukmi, dressed in armor and wielding his bow, had sworn before all the kings, quote, I shall not again enter Kundina if I do not kill Krishna in battle and bring Rukmini back with me. I swear this to you, close quote. And one line purport, BBT purport. Rukmi spoke these angry words and then set off to pursue Lord Krishna as described in the following verses. Om Jnanasamrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadanti Kam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pahan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Cha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpataribhyo Kripa Sindhubhyo Vicha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Ramapada Swami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'm going to be referencing Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur because he gives a little bit more extensive commentary, particularly for text 19 and 20, although the two lead into each other. So this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's comment. So quoting him, Rukmi, being intolerant, so the word used was amashi, that was in text 19 and 20, and very angry, and the Sanskrit was susamrabdaha, took up his bow and said, I will not enter Kundina without killing Krishna and bringing back Rukmini. So there's a little bit more of the purport, but I'm going to come, or the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, but just looking at that, which is echoing the translation here for the verses, but particularly drawing attention to the fact that these were the angry words that Rukmi spoke. And then he set off in pursuit of Lord Krishna with an entire military division. So if one pauses for a moment and think, what is the protocol for a king? And Rukmi is in the royal lineage, she's a prince. So he still should be adhering to royal protocol. So the royal protocol, in terms of action, is that any action undertaken by a king, a prince, has to adhere to the following criterion. Actions that are motivated by over-affection, arrogance, selfishness, or anger should be abandoned. If they cannot be abandoned, they should be delayed. So that's actually the protocol. Now, this is coming from, I often reference this when it comes to codes of behavior for persons in the royal lineage. It's coming from a compilation from the different Shrutis, a compilation that's entitled The Way of Kings. So this action on the part of Rukmi is motivated by anger. So he could not bear the fact that Krishna had carried off his sister to marry her in the Rakshasa style. That's what we're reading in the translation for text 18. So that particular act is described in this way. The moment when it happened. And this is what, Rukmi witnessed. So I'm quoting. It's from a little bit earlier on in the 53rd chapter of the 10th canto. Lifting the princess onto his chariot, whose flag bore the emblem of Garuda, Lord Madhava drove back the circle of kings. With Balaram in the lead, he slowly exited like a lion removing his prey from the midst of jackals. So you get a sense of how deliberate Lord Krishna's action was. And this is with the military divisions of all different kinds of kings who, out of goodwill to Shishupal, they were present there. Because they had actually even spoken in advance, they banded together thinking that they were going to be this really awesome, extreme force that Lord Krishna would have to contend to. But here you hear that he very slowly exited once he'd actually taken Rukmini. So this fits the definition of a Rakshasa marriage. A Rakshasa marriage takes place when the bride is stolen from one's rival suitors by force. That's the definition. And this is a Shruti statement that's found earlier on in the 52nd chapter of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So Srila Sukadeva Goswami, he states that Krishna had to beat down opposing kings to take Rukmini. And when narrating, Sukadeva Goswami, he describes it this way to Maharaj Parikshit. O hero, among the Kurus, the Supreme Lord himself, Govinda, married Bhishmaka's daughter Vaidarbi, who was a direct expansion of the goddess of fortune. The Lord did this by her desire, and in the process he beat down Salva and other kings who took Shishupal's side. Indeed, as everyone watched, so Krishna took Rukmini, just as Garuda boldly stole nectar from the demigods. So in all cases, the simile that's used is how Krishna is stealing Rukmini, but very boldly, very brazenly. So Rukmini displayed selfishness in a much earlier action. So here, what I've just described is that he's not adhering to the regular protocol, because we've just heard how, he witnessed this, and there was a whole skirmish that happened with the other kings, and they were simply devastated by the small band of the Yadu army of Krishna. But Rukmi, he's actually experiencing extreme anger. So his response is, without thought, immediately going in pursuit of Lord Krishna. And so I've just described the scenario, and also that he didn't actually take the appropriate pause that's required for somebody in the royal lineage. And going even further into that particular protocol for somebody in the royal lineage, that actions shouldn't really be undertaken when there's some selfishness. Rukmi actually displayed selfishness in a much earlier action regarding the choice he made of a suitor for his sister Rukmini. And here's a description of Rukmi's earlier action. Because Rukmi envied the Lord, O king, he forbade his family members to give his sister to Krishna, although they wanted to. Instead, Rukmi decided to give Rukmini to Shishupal. So there's a fundamental principle, an injunction that's given by Lord Krishna, which is eternally true and without exception applicable to all actions. So we have to look at this because obviously Rukmi is springing into action, and he's undertaken two actions. The one I've just pointed out was based on selfishness, enviousness, and the previous one is based on anger. So the fundamental principle that applies to action, and it's applicable to all actions, and it's eternally true, and there's no exception. This is that fundamental principle. And this is Krishna speaking. And it's Bhagavad Gita 3:31. Those persons who execute their duties according to my injunctions and who follow this teaching faithfully without envy become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. So there's obviously going to be consequences for Rukmi's actions because it's a fruitive action. He's coming from a position of wanting to achieve a certain result based on his emotions and his outlook. And this injunction that Lord Krishna is giving is actually that one surrendering all one's works unto him without a desire for profiting in any way, with no claims to proprietorship or ownership, and also that one's free from lethargy. So discharging duties requires one to become conscious of Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada writes this way: such an injunction may make things a little difficult. Nevertheless, duties must be carried out with dependence on Krishna, because that is the constitutional position of the living entity. The living entity cannot be happy independent of the cooperation of the Supreme Lord, because the eternal constitutional position of the living entity is to become subordinate to the desires of the Lord. So, rather beautifully explained by Srila Prabhupada that basically it requires the cooperation of Lord Krishna for one to actually be happy in performing one's actions. And then if one's performing the actions, one's thinking one's dependent on Lord Krishna. And the reason this is so is that by constitution we're a part of Lord Krishna. So that constitutional aspect is the actual composition of one's being, which is one of blissfulness, knowledge, and being eternal. So one has to function on that plane to actually be happy. So there's a corollary to this position and injunction, and it's also explained by Lord Krishna. So there's an alternative. And this is how Krishna puts it, it's Bhagavad Gita 3:32. But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them are to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled, and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. So there's no hope of actually everything falling into place. It doesn't happen. So if one's not having the previously described approach of adhering to the injunction given by Krishna for how one should be acting, I mean, should is, always one could have resistance, but it's an injunction that's allowing for that happiness, for knowledge, and for everything falling perfectly into place. And this is that verse. Because it's applicable to Rukmi, so I'm going to read it. Tvet etad abhisuyanto nanutishtanti me matam sarva jnana vimudamatan vidhi nashtan achetasaha. So those who are out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them are to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled and ruined in their endeavor for perfection. So Srila Prabhupada writes what the effect is of not being Krishna conscious. And this is how he puts it. As there is punishment for disobedience to the order of the Supreme Executive Head, so there is certainly punishment for disobedience to the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A disobedient person, however, great he may be, if he is ignorant of his own self and of the Supreme Brahman, Paramatma, and the Personality of Godhead due to a vacant heart, therefore there is no hope of perfection for him. So it means everything always remains open-ended and incomplete and uncertain. So that's what's meant by perfection not being there. And Rukmi can be said to have abused his position, and because he was in the position of eldest brother of Rukmini, so he abused his position in carrying out his duties. And he could also be said to have acted with an impure motive. It wasn't based on his sister's well-being. It wasn't based on her desire. It wasn't based on the desire of the citizens. It wasn't based on the desire of the family. So he certainly acted with impure motives. It was an enviousness towards Krishna. So most certainly he was not subordinate to the desires of Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna himself affirms the position of Rukmi after he hears the confidential message of Princess Vaidarbhi. So this is what Krishna says of the position of Rukmi. Just as Rukmini's mind is fixed on me, my mind is fixed on her. I can't even sleep at night. I know that Rukmi, out of envy, has forbidden our marriage. So Krishna knows what the motive was, and he understands what's the position of Rukmi. So thus, Rukmi was motivated by selfishness or enviousness of Lord Krishna and anger. And he declares his intention to kill Lord Krishna, an action which he certainly doesn't delay according to royal protocol, because he pursues Lord Krishna with an entire military division. Now again, anger, if we were to look at that, is described as a gate leading to hell. The other two being lust and greed. So again, the injunction is the following. So this is a scriptural injunction, and it's coming from Bhagavad Gita 16:21. Every sane man should give these up, for they lead to the degradation of the soul. So the implication is that if one avoids anger, greed, and lust, then one avoids a demoniac nature. Because that's a degradation of the soul. One's nature has actually become completely demoniac by giving way to those particular emotions, and I guess motivations, anger, lust, or greed. Rukmi, he stayed with his enviousness and his anger, and this implies a demoniac nature. That demoniac nature is certain to lead to hell, and that's because that's coming from the injunction given by Lord Krishna. And Srila Baladev Vijayabhusan, he gives the corollary. So he explains, if you don't take that position or you don't accept that injunction, the person who is free from these three gates leading to darkness acts in the best interest of the self and thus attains liberation. One who gives up acting according to anger, greed, and lust performs most beneficial acts of actions according to his ashram and attains liberation. So actually, he is actually elaborating what happens if you do give up lust, anger, and greed, or actions that are motivated by those three emotions or forces. It means that one's actually performing actions that are in the interest of everyone. And it also means that one's going to become free from all that regular suffering that's there when one's caught up in those kind of emotions. So one who gives up acting according to anger, or acting according to greed, or acting according to lust, performs these beneficial acts according to his ashram. And so acting according to the injunction of Krishna consciousness allows one to escape these three gates of hell and to perform actions conducive to self-realization. So just by actually thinking in a Krishna conscious way, it's allowing one, having that dependence on Krishna, it's allowing one to bypass acting on those emotions or being motivated by those particular drives, anger or greed or lust. And Srila Prabhupada explains this position. This is how he puts it. The more a person is freed from anger, lust, and greed, the more his existence becomes pure. Then he can follow the rules and regulations enjoined in the Vedic literature. By following the regulative principles of human life, one gradually raises himself to the platform of spiritual realization. So it's a very gradual process, but one always has to be conscious what the motives are for one's actions. And ideally, one is actually following the scriptural injunction of acting in a Krishna conscious manner, so that one can bypass entering into those gates that lead one into hellish conditions. So Srila Vishwanath, he continues his commentary. There's just a little bit more that he says. And this is what he says. Bharati, goddess Saraswati, gives the following meaning for what we've just read, which was from text 19 and 20. Rukmi, dressed in armor and wielding his bow, had sworn before the kings, I shall not again enter Kundina if I do not kill Krishna in battle and bring Rukmini back with me. I swear this to you. So in Srila Vishwanath's In Srila Vishwanath's commentary, he gives a further meaning that he says comes from Goddess Saraswati. And Srila Vishwanath has this extraordinary ability to know the hearts of different great personalities. So this is Goddess Saraswati, who actually sees more the reality of things and puts it this way. It's as though Rukmi said, I will not enter Kundina because I do not understand Krishna. And there was the Sanskrit, ahatva, agnatva. Therefore, I will not try to stop him. So completely opposite, actually, from what appears to be. And it's because the goddess of fortune is actually giving the reality for Rukmi. He doesn't actually understand Krishna. And if he's acknowledging that, then he would not be trying to stop Krishna. So Rukmi is indeed the person of the very vacant heart, to use Srila Prabhupada's term, because he's not engaged in Krishna consciousness. So he doesn't understand Krishna. And he is according to his own whim of anger. Thus, he is completely discarding scriptural injunctions. And Srila Prabhupada states that in human life, one is meant to follow the regulations for elevating one's life. But if one does not do so, one degrades himself. So which makes sense, because you're actually entering those gates that lead to some sort of hellishness, whether one's entered the gate of anger, whether one's entered the gate of greed, entered the gate of lustfulness. It's a gate leading to some hellish condition. So of course, the opposite is that trying to act in a Krishna conscious way and gradually making one's life more regulated, being always aware of the scriptural injunctions, means that one's elevating one's life. So Rukmi was intending to deliver punishment. And the protocol, again, for a king or a prince indicates this. I'm quoting from Way of Kings. Just punishment cannot be administered by a king or a prince who's driven by greed, whose character is unevolved, and who possesses no self-control. So that's the injunction. And not understanding Krishna means that Rukmi is living in anxiety. He's got no knowledge of his next life, and is in fact fearful, because this is caused by an absorption in the illusory energy. Immediately, if there's no Krishna consciousness, there's fearfulness and there's anxiety. So being free from fear is possible only when one is confident that one is a spiritual part of the Supreme Lord, and therefore is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. So one can see that actually everything in terms of the action that Rukmi was going to undertake, his verbal expression to the other kings, his springing into action was completely doomed. Completely doomed. So that's as much as emerged from these 2 or 3 verses. If there's any thoughts to expand the discussion.
What you mentioned of the protocol of acting, that if one is influenced by selfishness, by anger, and the other one was what? In the waves of kings, no.
Yeah, I'll go back to the particular statement. The protocol for a king, in terms of action that he undertakes, actions that are motivated by over-affection, arrogance, selfishness or anger should be abandoned.
That's quite something. And it says that if one cannot, then you just delay it, which is it's quite telling, because if we see in the case of Rukmi, he just witnessed the Yadu force led by Balaram just completely demolish, the whole combined force of all these powerful kings. Like, completely demolish them, that they have to retreat. And then, so if you think about it, if he's going to act, if he feels angry, and he just can, hold the anger, but just to calculate, well, if you put 1 and 2 together, then it may not, the odds are against you, because he just defeated, the combined force of all the kings. So what is he by himself with his army going to do? So the odds are against him, but even though the odds are against him, he just can delay it. So the thing of thinking that what this selfishness, arrogance, anger does when we have to be, in a situation that we have to make a choice, and to not pause and see the situation and see the type of consequences that can have in our life, is quite something, how that whole thing takes over. Because you lose, it's what Krishna says in the Gita, that when anger comes, then the next step is delusion, and from delusion you lose a sense of connection with reality, and you lose your intelligence, and then you're finished. You go down. So the types of risks that are done, the loss that you have when you act like that, out of anger or arrogance, you do something, and then whatever is, you have, then you basically risk it and throw it out. So there is Rukmi. He's a king. He's a prince. Who's going to be the next in line to have to rule the whole kingdom. He's in a position of piety, of great achievements and possessions and control and influence, and he goes and risks the whole thing just because he couldn't control his anger and his envies. He couldn't pause. So now, not only that, he makes this vow that, again, when you out of anger, you use an arrogance, you announce, that he will kill Krishna, and for sure, so everybody listens, that he means what he said, he will not enter, So now, with the odds against him, what he's risking, and indeed, at the end, he not only gets punished, he gets humiliated, and he cannot enter the kingdom. So he lost everything. He lost everything just by that choice. So it's quite something, that also pretty much telling, because as devotees, because this is explaining, you explain that there's a these are propensities that leads one to demoniac sort of thinking. Now, as devotees, we have to deal still with selfishness, and sometimes with these things, with arrogance and anger, and, over affection or this and that, all these things. I mean, in devotees you see that the loss is a little subdued, but not completely eliminated. But this selfishness and sometimes arrogance is there that we have to deal with. And when we make choices, when our choices in devotional service are mixed with these things, it's quite disastrous for us and for others, So just comment on that. But thank you for the class.
Oh, thank you very much for expanding and turning to the picture of persons who are trying to follow scriptural injunctions, but fall prey to arrogance and selfishness, and the particular what's in the balance by giving way to the selfishness and arrogance that can actually lead to great loss. So there's a lot in the balance there if one chooses to go that route. So it's true, Rukmi actually, there's a certain arrogance when you think about it as well, to be making the announcement that he's making, just as you pointed out, because indeed there had been devastation of the armies of the other kings. And the interesting thing is that those armies of the other kings, they're there by their goodwill to support Shishupal. Now he's taken his own army of Kundina to actually fight Krishna. So it's very close to home. So he's going to lose his army. He's chosen to make such a statement that he will not actually have access to his kingdom anymore, as you pointed out, with the statement that he's making, and also completely arrogant because Krishna and Balaram had indeed literally severed. Those limbs were lying all over the battlefield of all those armies. So it was graphically visible. So even with graphic visibility, he's still the arrogance to go ahead with his action and gamble so much. So yes, that's very nice that you brought it up. Yeah, in terms of devotional life, it seems to me that the position of leadership, which is carrying with it the duty of making decisions in such a way that there's no entertainment of selfishness, there's no entertainment of arrogance or over-affection, would be extremely important for a fair-minded, balanced decision that is conducive to the well-being of everyone and conducive to the spiritual well-being of everyone. And so hence, if one does fall prey to the arrogance and the selfishness, one can see that the loss for a person in leadership would be very great. Literally that they lose their control of or the position, the control allowed by the position, because that is what ultimately Rukmi experienced. He experienced humiliation, and he was going to be killed, but it was just his sister pleading for his life that allowed him to leave in a disfigured way, and then in a disfigured way, and humiliated, and no kingdom. So the loss is obviously proportionate to the position one holds, and certainly the position of leadership, where these particular qualities are entertained, the arrogance and the selfishness. It seems that there's a very big kickback through loss of position, loss of control, and some humiliation, certainly. I mean, that's sort of if one were expanding as you've expanded, it would apply in a similar way. And that's interesting. Of course, I suppose because one is a person practicing Krishna consciousness is attempting to adhere to scriptural injunctions and be conscious of Krishna in the actions, but it means that in a particular action, the Krishna conscious component wasn't there. The other gates were entered. You know, the gate of whatever, anger, selfishness, enviousness. When those gates are entered, you open up that hellish world. And so there's always that choice. And I guess that's why, Srila Prabhupada says, it's like a thin razor's edge. So one has to be very conscious of what the motivation is in all cases. Is it being conscious of Krishna and what would be for Krishna's pleasure, or is it like sliding and giving way to one's own personal, more very narrow views that will bring one thinks will bring some satisfaction because it's, according to how one's viewing things. And that was Rukmi. He had a certain view. He didn't think, he couldn't handle the thought that Krishna had taken his sister through by force in the midst of all the rivals. He couldn't handle it. It was too much for his mind. So, yeah. It's can be kind of a delicate thing because it's an internal thing, and certainly if one is attempting to follow scriptural injunctions, it's more delicate because one is attempting to follow scriptural injunctions, but it means one's cast aside the Krishna conscious component, and that's when, indeed, the gates of hell have been opened for oneself. And it probably has an effect on everybody else. I mean, I'm sure there must have been so much disturbance in the kingdom because he was the eldest, there were 4 brothers and the one sister, so he was the eldest, so indeed he was next in line, as you pointed out. So disturbance must be there because I recall reading a biography of King George V, I believe, in England. So he was to become king, and he renounced the position after being a king for a week or a month or something, in order to marry a divorced woman. So this is more contemporary, I think half a century ago, when it was still not acceptable. There was a lot of disturbance because the other brother had never been trained to take the position. So he had been groomed since a child to take the position of king. So all the proper training was given to him, but the brother hadn't received the same because the brother didn't have the character or the same kind of mental capacity as the brother who was to become king. So when King George V renounced his position and this brother had to be put in the position, he was not properly equipped at all. So in fact, he had to be bolstered constantly by the advisors because he seriously was not properly equipped. He neither had the progressive outlook, the heroism of the elder brother. So I don't know if Rukmi has heroism, it doesn't seem like, but it's supposed to be a quality of a Kshatriya. So, but of course the heroism has to be tempered by intelligence. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.